Well, worship looks different everywhere you go. Everywhere you go, the worship service will be a little different. Especially if you're talking going overseas. You go to different countries, and the worship service is completely different. Worship looks completely different. You go to Africa, and it's going to be a little bit more lively than maybe you're used to, right? You go to Russia, or you go to an Eastern Orthodox church, and there's going to be all kinds of symbols and images and icons everywhere. You go to a Roman Catholic church, and it's going to be very ceremonious and have lots of ritual to it. But even if you stay in the United States, even if you stay in your own denomination, worship's going to look very different. Right? Some churches have no instruments. Some churches have a bunch of instruments. Some churches have a piano. Some churches have fog and lights and all kinds of craziness. And some churches, just have a few lights, and some churches don't have any. And it looks different everywhere you go. And so if worship looks so different, if it's so malleable, if it's so fluid, what is it then? Like, how do you define something that looks so different no matter what church you attend? What is worship? Jesus today, in our text, we're in Matthew chapter 6. Jesus today, he talks about praying, giving, and fasting. Giving, praying, and fasting. And for the Jews, this was acts of worship. These were considered kind of at the heart of worship. Going to synagogue was great, singing and all that, that was expected. But giving, praying, and fasting were what Jews really considered to be at the heart of worship. In fact, it's what people who weren't Jews, when they looked at Jews, they said, man, this is a people who gives a lot, this is a people who prays a lot, and this is a people who fast a lot. That's kind of what they defined them as. Giving, praying, and fasting. And the Jews considered this to be parts of their worship, but Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount seems to think that that's part of our worship as well. Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount gives his manifesto. We've been talking about that. And how the manifesto is kind of this is what it means to be a part of my kingdom. This is what it means to be a member of my group. And Jesus seems to reaffirm this idea that giving, praying, and fasting are worship still. They haven't gone away. They haven't changed. They're still worship. And so what is worship? What do these things have in common? Why is it that the Jews thought of their giving, their almsgiving? Why is it that they thought of praying? And why is it that they thought of fasting as means of worship? What do they have in common? We can't figure out what worship is. It's so different everywhere we go, but this seems to be important to Jesus. So what is it that they have in common? And the first thing is this, and we're in Matthew chapter 6. The first thing is I can tell you what worship isn't. Jesus spells it right out in verse 1, and it's going to be all throughout the text. Matthew 6, verse 1 says this, "Watch out. Don't do your good deeds publicly to be admired by others, for you will lose the reward from your Father in heaven." Right there he says what worship isn't. You see, I love movies. I love movies. I love going to the theater. I love watching them at home. I love movies. And I like to think of myself as kind of an educated moviegoer, but at the end of the day, I pretty much love anything you put in front of me, all right? Like, I love movies. But the thing that can ruin a movie quicker than anything else is really bad acting, right? Like, you got a movie and the acting is just terrible, and you're like, oh, this is just miserable, right? It's not very good. But great acting can make a movie. You can have corny dialogue, bad special effects, of not very good action, or even a good story, but you got someone who really pours their heart and soul into their character, and you're like, man, that was pretty impressive. And some of these actors go through crazy feats, go through all kinds of lengths to become their character. All right? Heath Ledger, he played the Joker, the villain in the Batman movie, and this insane, crazy type of villain. And he spent 2 weeks in a very rundown, ratty hotel in a very rundown, beat-up part of New York to kind of get in character, to kind of see what that's like. Hugh Jackman, when he was doing Les Miserables, he plays a guy who's just gets out of prison, and he's homeless, basically. He's got no food. He's on the run constantly, can't find a job. Really run-down guy. And when they shot those scenes in the movie, they did it all kind of in a day. He didn't sleep or eat for 48 hours to kind of get in that desperate kind of feel to his character. Daniel Day-Lewis did a movie where he played a man in a wheelchair, and the whole time they were shooting the movie, 2 to 3 months they were shooting the movie, stayed in the wheelchair, okay? Just to get in character, go through all these lengths to become someone else. But I think the greatest actor I know of, the person who's the best actor I can think of probably is me. Because I don't take hardly any prep. I don't have to do hardly anything special. I can quickly become someone I'm not. I can put on a mask. I can pretend. I can say the right things. I can do the right things. I can be someone I'm not with very little preparation involved. You see, Jesus is going to use a word here all throughout this, talking about these three things, these three aspects of worship. And the word he uses is hypocrite. And that's a Greek word. It comes from the Greek theater, and it means to wear a mask. It literally means someone who wears a mask. Because see, in Greek theater, that's what you did. You became a character. You put on a mask, and you recited your lines, but your mask, you put on that character. And the clearest thing, we're trying to figure out what worship is, but I can tell you right up front, Jesus says this is what worship isn't. It's not about acting. It's not about acting. When you come to church, when you come to worship God, Jesus expects you not to have a mask on. He says that's not what worship is about. And we can do it so easily. We can come and we can say the right things, we can do the right things, we can be the person I know you expect me to be, but that's not really who I am. And I'm not saying I don't want you to be on your best on Sunday. I want to be at my best. I'm not talking about what I wear, but I want to be at my best when I come to worship God as a community. I do. But I want to be at my best. Not what you expect to be my best. I want to be at my best and what God expects me to be at my best. Jesus does not want anyone to come and worship God and put on a face, put on a mask, put on an act. The church is supposed to be a place where that doesn't happen. But it's honestly a place where that happens more than almost anywhere else. You go to work and you want to be yourself, you want to get to know people, you want them to know who you are, around your family, yourself, but at church, go be someone different. No, Jesus says, don't do that. Worship is not about acting. That's what it's not about. He says it right up front. But we're going to try and figure out what worship is about. That's what it's not about, but what is it about? Jesus says that giving, praying, fasting, those are all aspects of it. So what do those things have in common? And the first thing he talks about here is giving. Matthew chapter 6, verses 2 through 4, it says this: "When you give to someone in need, don't do it as the hypocrites do, blowing trumpets in the synagogues and streets to call attention to their acts of charity. I tell you the truth, they have received all the reward they will ever get. But when you give to someone in need, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Give your gifts in private, and your Father, who sees everything, will reward you." You see, in Jesus' day, when some people gave, they made a great commotion about it, okay? And these are people who have money and wealth. You don't make a great commotion because you're like, oh, I gave $5 today, You don't do that. These are people who have a lot of money to give, and they want people to know it. I gave a lot. And when it talks about blowing of trumpets, we don't really know exactly what that means, but there's a couple opinions. First of all, the containers in the temple that you would go and give your offering to were kind of shaped like a trumpet. They had that kind of trumpet shape to them. And back in that day, they didn't have paperless money. So someone would come in, very wealthy person, going to make a large donation, not exactly going to use the best coin. I'm going to use more smaller coin, give it quarters. I'm going to dump that in there, and that's going to make a lot of racket. It's going to make everyone's going to be throwing in there a little bit. They're going to be giving, and then all of a sudden you just hear it going on and on and on and on. He's dumping in all this money. You look over and you think, oh man, that guy's really just giving a lot there. Another thing that this could mean is that when it's time to give, you blow some trumpets and the poor will come and you give it to them. Someone's about to give and says, hey, blow the trumpets, I'm about to give. Blow the trumpets, everyone comes, and you hand out to them. But the point of both of these is this: I want people to know I'm giving. I want people to know I'm giving. I'm giving a lot. People should know that about me. And we still do this today too, right? I mean, we want people to know if we've given a lot. We try to work it in. Maybe we be subtle about it. Maybe we don't be. But we try to work it in. Oh, I'm sorry, I can't go out to eat this week. I'm giving a little extra. Or sorry, I was late. I was helping someone out at Walmart. You had a homeless person there, and I had to help them out. So I'm sorry, I was late. Or we try to work it in like that. We try to let people know. You know what? I don't really want much, but, I did pay for that new addition to the church, so like a plaque put up. Why? Why do we want that? We want our name to be there. I want people to know I provided that for God's church. No. Jesus says when you give, don't do that. Why? Because giving has nothing to do with other people. It has everything to do with God. God's the audience, and it's worship. It's worship. When you give, you're worshiping. When we sing to God, we're worshiping. When we do other acts outside the church, we're worshiping. When you give, you are worshiping the same way. You're worshiping. You're worshiping God. And because God is the audience, and because we are worshiping, because giving is an act of worship only for God, why are we so afraid of being taken advantage of all the time? I talk to Christians all the time. People will follow Christ, and they're like, well, yeah, I used to give, and then I found out this person was using my money and spending it away, going out and getting booze or gambling with it or doing whatever, and so I don't really give to people anymore. Why? What difference does it make if you got taken advantage of? It really even wasn't for them. You were worshiping God when you gave it. I give money to you. I see someone at Walmart or something, I stop and I help them out, give them a few bucks or something. If they go and they use that money, they go, they gamble, they go, they waste it, they go, they spend it on alcohol, they still received it from me. I still worshiped when I gave it. Giving is about worship, and the audience is God. And I want us to be smart with our money. I don't want us to throw it away. I don't want us to be throwing resources away or anything like that. But we should never refuse. We should never give up on giving to people because we are afraid of being taken advantage of. That's not the point. Jesus was taken advantage of all the time. Jesus healed people, helped people all the time. What did they do? Go out and squander it. Go out and be unrepentant. Go out and do all this. He got taken advantage of all the time, and I want to be like Jesus. So when we give, giving's about God. He's the audience, and it's an act of worship. We shouldn't feel afraid about being taken advantage of. That's giving. But Jesus goes on to talk about praying next. In Matthew chapter 6, verses 5 through 6, first it says this, when you pray, don't be like the hypocrites who love to pray publicly on street corners and in the synagogues where everyone can see them. I tell you the truth, that is all the reward they will ever get. But when you pray, go away by yourself, shut the door behind you, and pray to your Father in private. And then your Father who sees everything will reward you. You see, the Jews were supposed to pray twice a day, and they did. They prayed in the morning, they prayed in the evening. But you had your time in the morning and evening, kind of whenever you wanted in the morning and wherever you wanted in the evening to pray. But the Pharisees, the hypocrites, they would happen to find themselves in the marketplace at that time. Or they'd happen to find themselves on the corner, the busiest corner of the busiest street in town. And, oh no, it's my time to pray. And you know what? Even though there's a lot of people around, I'm still going to pray anyway. And they'd start to pray right there. And people would look at that and they'd say, oh man, they're not embarrassed to pray in public like this. It's their time to pray and they're just doing it right here. And they must be pretty holy, pretty good. And some of us are afraid to pray in public, right? It's like, we want to pray or something, or people want you to pray, and you're like, no, not me. I don't do that. These guys were like pro prayers, okay? They were expert prayers. They knew the words. They knew exactly what to say. They get up and pray, and people were like coming down the aisle because they prayed, okay? Like they took pride in this. And they happened to just find themselves in the public eye when it was their time to pray. Just by accident. Oh, I forgot. Just happened to be at the marketplace when it's my time to pray. I was talking to a lady once, and she was with her friend at the supermarket, and her friend had decided, I need to pray more, so she set an alarm on her phone. Every day, when this alarm goes off, I'm praying. And she'd kind of forgotten about it. And they happened to be there, and the alarm went off, and she said, oh, shoot, I forgot about that. And her friend was like, what? She said, well, this is my time to pray. I'm supposed to be praying. And she said, well, we'll do that. We'll be done here in a few minutes. We'll do that. She said, you know what? No, we're going to do it right here. So right there in the middle of the supermarket, start praying out loud, like praying, okay? We're doing it right here. That was innocent enough. Like that was I believe that was innocent. I'm just trying to pray. Jesus says what these people were doing wasn't innocent. It wasn't just I forgot. It was no, I meant to be here. I wanted you to see me pray. I wanted you to see me do this. Praying is a holy, wonderful, worshipful thing. But these people did it to get attention. I wanted you to notice how good I am, how much work I put into this. Jesus goes on, though, to talk about prayer. And he says in Matthew chapter 6, starting in verse 7, when you pray, don't babble on and on as people of other religions do. They think their prayers are answered merely by repeating their words again and again. Don't be like them, for your Father knows exactly what you need even before you ask Him. It was common in a lot of pagan religions to use lengthy, wordy, special incantations when you pray. And this was the idea. Honestly, Zeus doesn't really care a whole lot about me. Like, he's throwing thunderbolts around and stuff, and I'm just down here, like, plowing my, acre land. He doesn't really care about me very much. But if I go to the priest, and the priest tells me exactly what to say, the special words, the right phrasing, the right number of words, then I can kind of twist his arm into caring. I don't really care, but, he said the special phrase, he said the special words, and so I kind of need to do this. That was the idea. They would even, when they went, they go to the priest and say, hey, I got this concern, my crops didn't come in, or I need this to happen, or I'm going for a promotion, or whatever. And the priest would say, all right, well, you go in there and pray. And when they went and prayed, it was very common for them to use every name of every god conceivable, even gods of other religions. It didn't matter. Maybe one of them will hear me. Just go through the list of like 100 gods and just keep going, blah, blah, blah. Maybe one of them will hear me. And Jesus says, when you pray, don't be like that. Because your God does care about you. You don't have to twist God's arm. It's not like God's up there saying, man, I really don't want to help Cody out. But you know what? Since he said the right thing, no, don't do that. If when you pray, you like to be as formal and upright as you can, that's fine. But remember, you're doing it for God. You're doing it to God, and he's the audience. But if when you pray, that's very foreign to you and that's very fake to you, and you want to pray in a more casual manner, that's fine too. What Jesus says is, don't worry about that. It's you and God. It's you and God. It's not you and the rest of the church. It's you and God. When you pray, this is how you do it. Between you and your Father. He's not against public prayer because he's about to give a public prayer. But he's saying when you pray, you're not doing it so other people can hear you and say, man, he knows the church words, right? Like sanctification, epistemology, like, man, he's got it down. No, don't do that. Don't do that. So he gives two bad models for prayer. He gives a very bad Jewish model, a very bad pagan model, and now he's going to give a good model. And Jesus says this, Matthew chapter 6, starting in verse 9. Pray like this, our Father in heaven, may your name be kept holy. May your kingdom come soon. May your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today the food we need, and forgive us our sins as we have forgiven those who sin against us. And don't let us yield to temptation, but rescue us from the evil one. Jesus says, when you pray, this is how it should be. This is how it should be. Recognize God's position. Ask God's kingdom to come. Ask for God's provision. Ask for God's forgiveness, and ask for God's deliverance. There's not a lot of me in there, is there? There's not a lot of me in that model prayer. Even where I'm at, God, give me my daily bread, the emphasis is still on God. God, please give me. God, please forgive me. And so Jesus says, when you pray, it's not about you. The Jewish hypocrites made it about them. I'm going to make sure I'm in public so people see me. And the pagans make it about them. I know the right words. I know the right, you come to me when you need to. No, it's not about you. God, please. Giving, praying. And then Jesus ends up here talking about fasting. In Matthew chapter 6, verse 16, starting in verse 16. For those of you who can count, we did skip 14 and 15. We're talking about that next week. Chapter 6, verse 16 says this, and when you fast, don't make it obvious, as the hypocrites do, for they try to look miserable and disheveled, so people will admire them for their fasting. I tell you the truth, that is the only reward they will ever get. But when you fast, comb your hair and wash your face, then no one will notice that you are fasting, except your Father who knows what you do in private. And your Father who sees everything will reward you. You see, fasting, we don't know a lot about fasting. We don't do it much today. And honestly, that's understandable. We live in the day of the Messiah. We live in the day of Jesus. We live in the Messianic age, the kingdom age. So that's a lot of rejoicing. That's a lot of rejoicing going on. But fasting is typically done with this. I really want something to change. We're desperate for change. There's a desperate situation going on. When the Jews got conquered and deported to Babylon, fasting went way, way up. Everyone talks about fasting then. Why? Because, man, this is a tough situation. We're not in our homeland. We're under pagan rule. And so we need this to change. Fasting is about being desperate for change. Being desperate for change. And this is so bad that I'm going to give up something my body desperately needs, like food, in order to have a consolidation with this. This is a horrible situation. So going above and beyond praying, I'm going to give this up. But you see, the Pharisees, they decided they're going to fast twice a week. And in and of itself, that's fine. But they decided when they fast, they're going to make sure everybody knows it. Everybody's got to know it, right? So when I fast, I'm going to, make sure, I haven't washed and I'm wearing my old clothes and maybe I smudged some dirt on my face. I'm not combing my hair and I walk out and, man, people are like, man, you look terrible. Like, you look really bad. What's wrong? And then you say, well, I'm fasting. The situation in the world right now, government, Rome, and I'm fasting. Like, have you ever known those people who are like way too serious all the time? Like, man, that's a God thing, and you're like, fasting? Like what? That's kind of this. Man, what's wrong? You're like, I'm fasting, because they want people to know. Yeah, look at me. I'm fasting twice a week. How often do you fast? That's the idea. And Jesus says, don't do that. In fact, Jesus says when you fast, so he kind of expects us to fast at some point, but he says when you fast, you know what? You put on your best clothes. You put on perfume. You anoint your head with oil. You wash up. Comb your hair. Make it look like that you're actually having a good time. Why? Because it's not about you. You're desperate for change. God, this is a terrible situation. God, what's happening to your church in Iraq is a terrible thing. People are being killed by the hundreds and the thousands. God, what is happening is terrible. And so, God, I'm so desperate for change that I can't even eat. I don't even want to eat. I'm so desperate for change that I've given this up. It's not about you. It's about that. It's about God. It has very little to do with you. So why draw attention to yourself? Why draw attention to yourself? Giving, praying, and fasting. Acts of worship. And so what is worship? What is worship? Jesus says giving, praying, and fasting are all forms of worship. And why? What do they have in common? Today we make worship about music, the type of songs we sing, the style of songs we sing. Is that what these things have in common? Today we make worship about the order of our service. Man, this church does it this way, and this church does it that way. Is that what these things have in common? We can make it about days of the week, Sunday morning, Wednesday night. Is that what these things have in common? Giving isn't receiving, so I don't think that's what it's about. Praying has nothing to do with me, so I can't be at the heart of worship. And fasting hurts. Could it be, is it possible that worship isn't about me? That it's about sacrificing for God? Is that possible? Let's pray. God, we love you, and we thank you for who you are. God, you gave up so much for us. You gave up your son. God, you care so much about us. God, we want to be a people who worship. We want to be a worshiping people. And God, sometimes we forget what that looks like. Sometimes we make worship about things that it's not supposed to be about. When really worship is about you, not me, about you. God, we love you. We praise you. You're holy and you're filled with glory. God, we praise you. And we ask that we can remember what the true meaning of worship is. And it's in your son's name that we pray. Amen.